were there, you probably went to this church, the Church of the Nativity. It's the oldest standing church in the world. It was built in the early 4th century A.D. by Emperor Constantine over the site where Jesus was born. If you look kind of back toward the very back of the picture there, you see the opening to the church. It's just at the edge of the shadow there at the back. Now, unlike most famous churches in the world that have massive entrances, kind of like St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, you enter St. Peter's Basilica in Rome through a door that is 25 feet high. But you don't do that here at the Church of the Nativity in the little town of Bethlehem. No, this instead is what you have. You have this grand entrance that is all of 4 feet high and 2 feet wide. It's called the Door of Humility. I mean, what building committee of any church would create a door like that one? Well, in antiquity, people had the propensity sometimes to ride their horses into the church, and of course we know how we're going to solve that problem. We're going to create a very, very low door. The angels sing in Luke 2, verse 24, "Glory to God in the highest," right? But the Church of the Nativity announces, "Glory to God to the lowest." So some of you have been here. To get to the place where Jesus was born in Bethlehem, you need to bend down, all right? You got to kneel. You have to stoop over. You have to get low. You have to squeeze yourself in. It's not glory to God in the highest, not in this church. The Church of the Nativity announces glory to God to the lowest. The glory of God is the presence of God. It's all of the sweetness and the joy of the gospel of Jesus. And if you're at the Church of the Nativity and you have to go through this door of humility, you begin to understand that the glory of God, the presence of God, to be where Jesus was born, is the glory of God to the lowest. The lowest. And that brings us to the truth of the day, this day. To get to Jesus. And not just to get to Jesus where he was born here in the little town of Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity, but to get to Jesus, period, you have to bow down and get low. Jesus says, "I've come for the righteous, not for the righteous, but for sinners." Jesus says, "I've come not for the strong, but for the weak." Jesus says, "I've not come for the haughty, but the humble." Glory to God to the lowest. Jesus is not for the high and holy. Jesus is for the meek and the lowly. If you want to get to Jesus, you have to bow down and get low. And that's too bad that the people in Micah's day didn't believe that. So this is our 4th installment of our sermon series on the 8th century prophet Micah. We're calling it Fierce Judgment and Final Grace. And as I said, the people in Micah's day didn't believe this at all. They believed glory to God to the highest. And we're the highest, we're the holiest, we're the brightest, and we're the best. Why? All you have to do is just look at what we can do for God. We're going to pick it up here in Micah chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high?" So how do I have access to God? That's the question this morning. It's a universal question. Most people ask this at some point during their lifetime. How do I connect with God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Now, 10,000, that's the highest number in the Hebrew language. You can't go any higher than 10,000 in Hebrew. So this is like saying, a bazillion gallons or rivers of oil. You see what they're saying here? They're saying, look, I can bring my best sacrifice, I can bring my best gifts, and God will be so impressed with me. He'll be so impressed with that. And if he's not impressed with calves and burnt offerings and rams and a myriad rivers of oil, then look at what they say in verse 7, "Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" Now, what's that all about? Well, that's talking about Abraham. Abraham's sacrificing of Isaac in Genesis chapter 22 on Mount Moriah. Oh boy, God will certainly be impressed with that. I mean, this is the sacrifice of all sacrifices, right? I will give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body, for the sin of my soul. It's glory to God to the highest. And look, we're the highest, we're the holiest, we're the most righteous, we're the brightest, and we are the best. And isn't there a part to all of us that kind of resonates with this idea? A part of us that thinks, well, if more people in the world were just more like me. You ever thought that before? Especially when you're driving down 377. If more people would just drive like me, if more people would be courteous like me, if more people were humble like me, then the world would be a much, much better place, right? Glory to God to the highest, and I'm the highest, I'm the brightest, I'm the best. After all, I'm an American, not an Americant. American, I can do whatever it is that I put my mind to. Jesus, though, if you want to get to Jesus, you got to bend down and get low. That's what Micah says. Micah says that in verse 8 of chapter 6. One of the most famous verses in Israel's prophetic writings in the entire Old Testament. You've probably heard this a time or three. Micah says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you?" What is it that he seeks? What does he want from us? I mean, does he want all of these external things like rivers of oil and fattened calves and burnt offerings and thousands of rams and your firstborn child? No. What does he want? He wants our hearts. He wants your lifestyle, the entirety of your life, body, mind, and spirit. See, he's shown you what he wants, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. It's glory to God to the lowest. That's what the Church of the Nativity in the little town of Bethlehem says. That's what Micah says. Glory to God to the lowest, to the humble people. This morning we're going to unpack these 5 words, walk humbly with your God. You ask the question, well, what does that look like? What does it look like in my life? Well, the first word is walk. Walk. This is the major way that the Bible talks about having a relationship with God, right? Walk. You probably know that. Already in Genesis chapter 5, it says, Enoch walked with God. The next chapter, Genesis chapter 6, says Noah walked with God. We spoke these words this morning. Micah chapter 4, let us walk in his way. This is how Paul talks about the Christian life. Throughout his letters, it's called a walk. A walk. And what's that entail? Well, it means that you make progress. If you're walking, you're naturally going somewhere, right? If you're walking 9 times out of 9, you know where it is that you're going. We're called to walk. We're called to make progress, to move in our Christian life. It's a relationship with Jesus, and we move forward in that relationship with Jesus. We walk, not stand, not sit, not with Jesus. No, walk. And as you're walking with Jesus, you can talk to him. You can share your heart with Jesus. You open up your ears. You can listen to him. You can have a close relationship with him. Walk. So we're not called to sit still or stand still, but to make progress. To walk, not sit, not stand, walk. Not run. You all know by now how I feel about running. I hate running, right? Hate running. And that's not at all true of my sister. My sister, she loves to run. She recently ran in the Boston Marathon back in October. I've lost count of the number of marathons that she has run in. Not me, not ever. You will never lose count of the number of marathons I have run in. I hate running. Hate running. You've probably seen those t-shirts that say, I live to run and I run to live. That's not what Micah says. See, if you're running, it's hard to have a relationship with someone because you're always out of breath when you're running. You have to watch where it is that you're going so you don't trip and fall. If you're running, it's hard to talk to someone. If you're running with Jesus, then you're missing out. You're in a hurry. You're preoccupied. What's next on my calendar? Where do I have to be? Where do I have to go to next? You're trying to figure out everything and everyone all the time. So maybe some of us need to start walking because we're sitting or we're standing still, no progress. Others of us, well, we need to stop running. Slow down, listen to and talk with Jesus. So it's a walk, not sit, stand, or run. Walk. And then Micah says, walk humbly. Walk humbly. That word humbly, it comes from a Latin word, humus. And humus literally means on the ground. It means low, lowly. Humus also forms another English word, and what word might that be? Human. Human. You get it? When I'm humble, when I'm lowly, I'm human. I'm more human. Conversely, if I'm not humble, I'm less than human. Instead, I'm beastly. I'm ravenous. I'm like an animal. But if I want to be human, the more humble I am, the more human I become. Humble people know that they're not calling the shots. God is. Humble people know that they're not in charge. God is. Humble people know that they're not the creator. God is. The Bible is filled with people who are humble people. They live low, right? Abraham says, Genesis 18, verse 27, he says, I am but dust and ashes. Now that's pretty low. Moses is called the most humble person on earth in chapter 12 of Numbers. And Moses says in Exodus 3, verse 11, who am I to go to Pharaoh? The prophet Isaiah, while he is in the throne room of God, Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5, Isaiah says, woe is me, I'm lost. John the Baptist, he comes along, and speaking of Jesus, he says in John 3, verse 30, Jesus, must increase, I must decrease. Paul, 1 Timothy 1, verse 15 says, I am the chief of sinners. Not I was, right? We all know Paul was pre-conversion. Paul killed Christians, but that's not what Paul says. No, Paul says, I am. I still am the chief of sinners. He says in Romans 7, verse 24, I am a wretched man. Not I was, Paul certainly was. He says, I am. I still am. Biblical believers understand to get to Jesus, you have to bow down and get low. Little boy wrote a letter to Santa. He said, Dear Santa, 3 little boys live in my house. Jeffrey is 2. David is 4. Norman is 7. Jeffrey is never good. David is sometimes good. Norman is always good. Santa, I'm Norman. I'm not Norman. Neither are you. None of us are Norman. We have sin and ugliness in our hearts. We have failure stamped all over our lives. Micah says, walk. If you're standing still or sitting, it's time to walk. Get moving in this relationship. If you're running, then you need to slow down. Take a deep breath. He's God, we're not, so we walk humbly. Humbly. And the more humble we are, the more human we become. Micah goes on in the verse, walk humbly with your God. Micah could very easily have said, walk humbly with God, and we would get that, we understand that, but he uses this word, this second person singular pronoun, your. your God. It's a personal relationship. Walk humbly with your God. It's a gospel word, this word your. It means that God, the triune God, the only true God, the gospel God, is your God, come what may. It means that God is your God, no matter how dark it becomes in your life. It means that God is your God, whatever happens. Count on it. Count on it in the darkest and deepest points of your life. He is your God. You're baptized. Isaiah 43 verse 1. When you were baptized, God said, I've redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. So you belong to God. God says, I'm your God. You are my child. Song of Solomon 6 verse 3 says, I am my beloved's and he is mine. In Hebrew, it is beautifully poetic. Ani ladodi vadodi li. Famous verse. I am my beloved's and he is mine. Walk humbly with your God. The gospel God. The God who says to you, I will never leave you. I will never abandon you. July of 1994, NASA scientists, they watched in real time a meteor that they called Shoemaker crash into the planet Jupiter. They were just amazed at what occurred when that happened, all this dust and ash blowing up into what passes for atmosphere on Jupiter. They began to theorize what this massive strike would have done to this massive planet. And finally, after a couple of weeks of all of that, one of the NASA scientists asked the most obvious question. What would that question be? What if that had been us? What if the heavens had collided with planet Earth? Oh my, what a transformation that would bring about. What a change that would be. Well, brace yourself, because that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what we confess as followers of Jesus, right? That the heavens collided with planet Earth, and ground zero of the strike was an animal feeding trough in the little town of Bethlehem, and it was an eternity-changing event. Glory to God to the lowest, and glory to God in the lowest. God's glory is found in the lowest place, in an animal feeding trough to a bewildered stepfather named Joseph and a 14-year-old teenage mother named Mary. God became human, and you understand, this is huge. When you're humble, we're most human, right? So if that is true, and if God became a human being, then he becomes absolutely humble. That's what Paul teaches in Philippians chapter 2. You just heard it. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. He humbled himself. Paul puts it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. He says, who being rich, yet for your sakes became poor. Of course, in our gospel reading this morning, the Apostle John, the Word, the eternal pre-existent Word, the second person of the Holy Trinity, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God became one of us. You see, in God's great gospel, he not only sends, messengers like Micah. He not only sends, he becomes. He not only looks down, he lives among. He not only talks to us, he lives with us as one of us. Indeed, certainly heaven collided with planet Earth. Heaven has come to Earth. But it's not what we would expect, is it? This is the central message of the Bible, isn't it? In the manger, God gave us his very self. It's God's glory in the lowest. God comes to the lowest places to find the lowest and the least people. God is concerned about our mess and about our muck and our mire, all of the little minutia in our lives. God comes for people who are willing to admit that they are POH, plain old human. To get to Jesus, you have to bow down and get low. Martin Luther was preaching on this Christmas day of 1527. Here's part of his sermon. Luther says, reason and will ascend and seek above. And we all understand that. Glory to God to the highest. And we're the highest. We're the brightest and the best, right? And I can do it. I can climb the ladder. I'm an American, not an American. That's how we're wired. That's how we think. But Luther goes on to say, but if you would have joy, bend yourself down to this place. There you will find that child given for you who is your Creator lying in a manger. I know of no God but the one in the manger and on the cross. We can raise ourselves up too high, but we can never stoop too low. No wonder Micah says, walk humbly with your God. And the manger is pretty low, isn't it? But Luther reminds us that there was something awaiting that small little child lower than a manger. And that would be the ugliness and the vileness and the beastly animal display of human nature on a cross. Cicero, a very famous politician in the Roman Empire, he died in about 43 BC. Cicero famously wrote about the cross. Crucifixion was a daily event in the Roman Empire, and Cicero famously said, the cross is the most cruel and the most hideous of all tortures. Rome had a whole book on how to torture people, but this, the cross, was the most vile, the most violent, the most hideous. It was the most ugly. So here's your God, the God of the manger, the God of the cross, the God with outstretched arms, the God who shed his blood for you, the God who comes down all the way to the gutter for you. So what might we do with all of this? Come to Bethlehem. Bethlehem, of course. Come to Bethlehem and see him whose birth the angels sing. Come adore on bended knee. Everybody get this? It's the major point of the sermon, right? The truth of the day. The hymn writer says, come adore on bended knee. Christ the Lord, the newborn King. Glory to God in the lowest. Glory to God to the lowest. Glory to God for the lowest. For you. Forever.